From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Along with Jacob Clout and Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. Beginning today's show is livestock economist Elliott Dennis from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with a cattle market update. He discusses cutout value price factors, trends in slaughter weights, and beef slaughter cows. Then K-State Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair Jenny Ifft continues today's show with a look at fall 2025 net farm income. She explains what's impacting it and how it compares to previous years. And K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts wraps up today's program with a discussion on prairie dogs as he describes and compares the various control options. It's all just ahead on Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.
Tuned into Agriculture Today. I'm Jacob Clout in for Shelby Varner, and we kick off our Monday show with a cattle market update given by University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. Elliott, thank you for joining us today.
Yep, thanks for having me again.
Elliott, starting out our conversation with the current drivers of cutout value prices.
Yeah, cutout has really been a lot higher than we would have experienced at this time. And normally what we would see is that cutout value would peak sometime in that May, June time, and then really kind of really table off or dip down to somewhere in July. And what we've seen with the cutout values, it's really been rather solid. It's been really horizontal and we'd say counter-cyclical. And really what's been driving that has been the chuck. When we think about the different parts of the cutout's a calculation by USDA made up of the different subprimals that are wholesaled. And really chuck has been driving it. Normally we'd see about a $60 per hundredweight drop from that peak sometime in May to July. And we've actually gone up $30 per hundredweight from about $250 to $280 on the chuck per hundredweight. And so chuck, for a large portion, has been really driving this. And really what's been driving that is because when we think about just ground beef and how tight we've been on the ground beef demand has really been these 90s. So if we don't have 90s that come from cull cows, where do we get them? We can't get them from slaughter cows because it's 50%. That's 50% or 50s. And really where we get them is we grind primos. Chuck and round primarily being the ones that we grind. So that's really why we've seen a strong demand for chucks there. And really, when we think about more recently, kind of where we're going out in the next couple weeks, we're thinking about, brisket has really been a shining star over the last week or two. And really what we've seen is normally we see this slight uptick around this time, end of October. We've actually hit that, I'd say, probably a week and a half earlier. And so it looks like people are trying to fill up kind of their wholesale category going into Thanksgiving and to the different holidays during December, Christmas being one of them.
Elliott also wanting to mention where the industry is at regarding beef slaughter cow prices.
Yeah, and so beef cow slaughter, as we were talking, is going down. Herd inventory, we know is going to be tighter in 2025 and 2026. As we start to reduce the number of cows that we're actually harvesting, we're at about 50 to 55,000 weekly nationally, and that's down from about 60 to 65,000 nationally over the last 5 years. So with that reduction in beef cow supply or harvest, is really kind of what's helping drive a lot of that chuck value being ground into ground beef. And we're still importing a lot of ground beef. And as we see, you might have heard some of the import-export numbers, we're very import-heavy, and once again, that's primarily driven kind of by that ground beef demand that we have in the market right now.
What does the current cash market look like?
Yeah, so as we've seen over the last couple weeks that packer margins have been started to go into the black or started to become profitable for them to start, killing cattle, and so that's why we've seen, I'd say, a larger demand over the last week or so to really pull cattle forward and to harvest them. And so when there's profits to be made, they want to harvest a lot. So we've kind of see that cash price kind of creeped up. It's about $2 higher here in the northern plains, and really it's been some of the highest prices we've seen for cash cattle since about July. The futures market has kind of mixed results in how they've been responding to things. December contract for live cattle has been the most highly traded as far as the open interest there. And really we've seen kind of as we progressed through the week with different events, we went from about 186 in the early part of the week to kind of peaking out somewhere in the middle of the week, kind of regressed back down, and now we're finishing the week about 189 and a half on Friday. So it's really kind of a big deal that prices have been able to move, and I think it's a kind of big indication of where they think the cash market potentially go. When we're looking at more in the futures or kind of further in the market, we're thinking about that early kind of summer contract. And so that June contract, we're looking at 186 kind of resistance level there, even though we're trading a couple dollars hundredweight below that. So what is going to move that market in the future? I think we'd have to really see. The driving number is likely to be that cattle inventory report that we see come at the end of January.
What are the trends in slaughter weights and discounts?
Yeah, so as we started to see lower inventory with feeder cattle and kind of projected, I'd say deficit of feeder cattle in the market, we've started to see weights creep up. This hasn't been something new. This has been something we've been really talking about since April. And the counter-cyclical movement that really weights really just kind of stayed flat through summer when they should have decreased. Now they've, I would say, kind of matched trend just at higher levels. And we're at some very, very high weights. 858 pounds for heifers, approximately 950 pounds for steers. Really, we're pushing that upper limit. And so when we think about feeding cattle longer, there's really two primary things that we get. We get generally more choice quality meat products that come out relative to select, and we kind of have the ability to grade cattle a little bit better with that. But if we produce them too heavy, then there's discounts, particularly when we're harvesting them on the grid, right? And so when we think about this, we're thinking about in terms of, what's the incentive that the packer is giving to individuals to feed them a little bit longer, knowing that there's kind of this downside risk. So one of the ways that we can look at that is this premiums and discounts that USDA puts out there. And really what we've seen over the between 2019 and today is really that discount, dollars per hundredweight, has really started to decrease for this heavy cattle that are over 1,000 pounds on the hanging weight. And we've seen some of that discount increase for fat level, and so even though they may not be discounting producers for the weight, they are discounting a little bit more for the fat, even though it's just about 40 cents a hundredweight. So definitely need to keep an eye on how those premiums discounts begin to change, because that is definitely going to factor in if and when we should weights that we should essentially raise cattle to.
Elliott, we've talked a lot about fed cattle today, and so transitioning to feeder calves with lots of people weaning at this time, what advice do you have for producers?
Yeah, I think when we think about retaining animals or selling them now, it's always kind of this dilemma. Prices are relatively very high right now, and so there's kind of this incentive they could be high today, but we know supply is potentially changing into January and through the winter months. My advice is always, we got to look at what that value of gain. There's some great tools out there. Beef Basis, that was partially formed at Kansas State University, is one of those that I frequently use. Just calculating what is the value of gain, or how much do you anticipate receiving for that animal in the future, then comparing it to what it's going to cost us to actually raise that. That's the marketing aspect, which tends to be pretty simple, right? Value gain is less than or more than cost of gain. There's value out there. But when we think about deferring income from one year to the next, that's where I think we need to start talking to our accountant, making sure that it fits within our tax structure and with our larger operation of kind of when we're taking essentially that cash. So there's a market aspect, there's a tax aspect. Just make sure we kind of know where that's going to be, if there's markets out there, and then try to make the best decision possible.
Elliott closing out our discussion by talking about the McDonald's E. coli outbreak.
Yeah, this is really something that's been happening, and we've been talking about it all week. Essentially, some individuals throughout the United States, including here in Nebraska, have gotten sick. It's been primarily concentrated in Colorado, and for, I say, a large portion of the week that they were concerned that it might be primarily in the beef patty. We found out that it was in the quarter pounder, but what actually aspect of the quarter pounder? They've recently released that it was through sliced onions. That they believe it was from. I have a friend of mine who works for a major onion company, so I was talking to him about it. And, the amount of testing that they have to do by field and where kind of that E. coli can actually occur. And really kind of that idea is that E. coli can potentially occur on the onion. And there's lots of testing both in the water and after it's been packed. And so it's unfortunate that we've had this, but there is a large amount of testing that actually occurs before onions are being shipped, and so we're sad that individuals are sick. It's good to know that it's not from meat processing. Right now it's looking like it's from the onion side, and so from the impact on the cattle market side, it's going to affect us a little bit on the ground beef side because McDonald's, of course, has so many hamburgers, but that actually might be a reprieve for us, because it's just been such tight ground beef demand. So looks like we've kind of moved past that in the markets and shouldn't be a huge major disruption moving forward.
That was Elliott Dennis, livestock economist from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, with a cattle market update. I'm Jacob Cloughton for Shelby Varner, and we're taking a short break now, but stay tuned in because we'll be back with more up ahead.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about the fall 2024 Kansas Farm Income Outlook with K-State Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair Jenny Ifft. Jenny, thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Jenny, can you explain to us what this Net Farm Income Outlook is?
Right. So we calculate net farm income for the entire state of Kansas with the Rural and Farm Finance Policy Analysis Center at the University of Missouri. The goal of this center is to develop local and regional farm income and finance models so we can better understand local conditions and see the impact of policies based on those local conditions. But for this project, we estimate, again, the net farm income for the entire state of Kansas. So this includes both crops and livestock. It's all income, all expenses. It's also a net farm income measure, so it includes things like inventory changes. You could also think of it as the agricultural GDP for the state of Kansas.
And so when we look at that net farm income, you mentioned a few of those factors. How are you guys really calculating net farm income?
So, we include receipts from all crops and all livestock, all expenses for both, inventory changes, and a few other things. Those are the big ones. It includes crop insurance, indemnities, government payments as well.
First, wanting to take a look at Kansas crops then, and just overall, how are they looking for 2024?
Well, yields on average are better for corn and soybeans and wheat too. Yields are better than 2023. So soybeans were 26 bushels per acre last year, and they're right around 39 for this year. Corn was 119 on average. It's up to 138 this year. There's not to say there aren't counties that had tough growing conditions, but the average is higher. But then you combine those higher yields with lower prices, and you still have crop receipts being down. So right now, crop receipts are down 23% from 2022.
So, Jenny, overall, how is net farm income in 2024?
Well, if you just compare it to last year, the picture's not too rosy. So net farm income was about $5.9 billion in 2023. This year, it's forecast to be at about $4.7 billion. That's about a 20% drop. And I know a lot, especially crop producers, are definitely feeling some pain, tight profit margins, not a ton of optimism. However, I would want to point out that 2023 $5.9 billion. That's a high number. We don't, we have seen similar levels of income in previous years, but that's amongst the top. So on aggregate, 2023 was pretty good. Now we're starting to see a decline. However, the picture does look really different for crops versus livestock.
And so what is that picture we're seeing for crops?
So crop receipts are down about 8% from 2023, or down 23% from 2022. And that's been mostly because of prices. Yields are up from last year. So, last year there was pretty high crop insurance indemnities. Not everywhere. It's always kind of mixed when you look at Kansas, but yields are definitely up this year. So, that helps a little bit depending where you are. But the impact of lower prices is really creating a profit squeeze for crop producers.
Do some of the different crop commodities look a little bit different for 2024?
Yeah, it's wheat's up a tick from 2024 to 2023. It's nearly flat. So again, those higher yields helped a little bit, but the net effect was those low prices bringing receipts down.
Jenny, also wanting to mention what we're seeing for livestock when it comes to Kansas net farm income.
Well, livestock is nearly the opposite of crops right now if you look at the revenue, their receipts. So livestock receipts are up 10% from 2022 to 2024, and they're up about 23% from 2022 to 2024. And cattle receipts are over half of all farm receipts for the state of Kansas. So that has a big impact for sure.
What about for hogs?
Hogs are up in 2024. That's due to slightly higher numbers and stable prices.
Jenny, what about for dairy?
Well, that's another bright spot, I would say. Dairy receipts are projected to be up 13%, and that's benefiting from both an increase in milk production as well as higher milk prices this year.
And we know to make any of these commodities, expenses have to happen. What are we seeing for expenses?
Well, you'd think they'd be down on aggregate, but they're actually up. So expenses are up about 5 to 6% from last year, but you really have to break this down. Most of that increase in expenses was coming from purchased livestock. So if you're selling feeder cattle, that's a benefit for our ranchers and stockmen out there. If you're buying feeder cattle, that's an extra expense. So that's really why you're seeing expenses go up. For crop expenses, in most cases, they are starting to come down. So on the other hand, feed expenses did come down a little bit in 2024. So you're starting to see the impact of lower crop prices on feed expenses. For crop farms, they are starting to see some relief in a couple areas, some important ones. So fertilizer prices are down, fertilizer expenses are down, and fuel and oil expenses are down this year.
Is there a driving force behind why expenses are up this year?
Total expenses are actually up this year, and that's almost entirely because of purchased livestock. So that's on the positive side of the ledger for people who are selling feeder cattle. If you're buying feeder cattle, that's what's driving that extra expense. Feed's down a tick. So, and as you'd expect, as crop prices decrease, you do see a decrease in feed prices. That'll probably continue into the future as well. Fertilizer and fuel are down for crop farms as well as some other major expense categories. So they are seeing some relief on expenses, but combined with those lower prices, it's still a pretty tight squeeze.
Jenny, can you kind of tie this all back together for us for Kansas 2024 net farm income?
So the 2024 net farm income of $4.7 billion, historically, that's not a low number. It feels like a large drop from 2023, and it is. But in a lot of years, we've had net farm income in the $2 to $3 billion range. But the big difference right now is between crops and livestock. Crop revenue is down, and those lower prices are having a bigger bite than the reduction in expenses. For cattle producers, especially if you're selling feeder cattle, this is a time where maybe they can make some money. So it's a very mixed picture this year.
Jenny, you mentioned that this year's net farm income is still relatively high when we compare back to 2022 per se.
Yeah, net farm income is actually up 10% from 2022.
Jenny, as we do take a look forward, what's kind of the picture you're seeing for 2025?
Well, if you look at the aggregate, we are expecting net farm income to be up to a little over $5 billion for 2025. That's about a 6 to 7% increase for this year. And that's based on a couple forecasts as well as some assumptions. So if we compare 25 to 24, most of our crop yields were below average. When we make forecasts for 2025, we're going to assume average yields. So, let's say we get back up to average yields. For prices for 25, it's up and down for some. So we're forecasting corn prices up a little bit, soybeans down, wheat up. But it's all within a relatively small range. So on the crop sides, you have, stable prices in the forecast and slightly higher yields. On the cattle side, we're expecting numbers to be largely stable with continued strong prices and a continued decline in expenses. So the aggregate of that picture is a 6 to 7% increase in net farm income with the caveat that, we're looking a year out. So there's a lot of uncertainty.
Where can people find this report if they'd like to read more on Fall 2024 Kansas Farm Income Outlook?
Well, you can always go to agmanager.info. We put all our materials there, as well as the RAF website, which is ruleandfarmfinance.com.
Wonderful, Jenny. I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yep, happy to be here.
That was Kansas State University Flinchbaugh Agricultural Policy Chair Jenny Ifft, and she was discussing the Kansas Farm Income Outlook for Fall 2024, which was done with the Rural and Farm Finance Policy Analysis Center at the University of Missouri in collaboration with Kansas State University's Department of Agricultural Economics. You can check out this Kansas Farm Income Outlook by going to ruralandfarmfinance.com. Again, that is ruralandfarmfinance.com. I will link it in today's show notes on agtoday.net. And just as a reminder, if you're wanting to stay up to date with K-State's Agricultural Economics Department, the best way to do that is by checking out agmanager.info. I would also like to remind you about the Kansas Income Tax Institute. The first one is taking place October 30th through the 31st online. From there, there's Garden City, November 4th and 5th, Hayes, November 6th and 7th, Lawrence, November 13th and 14th, Salina, November 25th and 26th, Wichita on December 2nd and 3rd, Pittsburgh, December 11th and 12th, and the final online session, December 16th through the 17th. I will link a brochure to this where you can register and read more information on it in today's show notes. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show talking about prairie dogs with K-State wildlife specialist Drew Ricketts. Drew, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Shelby.
Drew, why are we talking about prairie dogs this time of year?
Well, a couple reasons. Fall is a time when we do see some dispersal of prairie dogs, so the young ones that were produced this year might be traveling around looking for new places to live, and they oftentimes take up residence in old prairie dog colonies. So folks may see prairie dog colonies that haven't been occupied for some time become reoccupied at this time of the year, so it's a good time to be on the lookout for that if that's something that you're concerned about.
Is this time a time for control also?
It is, yeah. So that's the other reason that we're talking about prairie dogs right now. So the two most popular toxicants that are used for prairie dog control are chlorofascinone and difascinone. Those are the active ingredients. People would more commonly know those products by Rosol and Caput D. The other product that's a common toxicant would be zinc phosphide. Zinc phosphide is labeled for use from July through January, but folks tend to find that it's a little bit less effective than the other two products. Those two products opened up on October 1st, and they are available for use from October 1st until March 15th. So those products are, like I said, the most effective options and the most common options for control controlling prairie dogs in rangeland settings. So that's something we need to make sure that we talk about the difference between rangeland and cropland settings too.
And can you share with us a little bit more of why we really need to make sure we are on rangeland?
Yeah. So these products, they're toxicants that are typically delivered on a grain-based bait. So it's going to be poison oats or something like that. And there's concern that could enter the food chain if it was out in a non-rangeland setting, like if it was out in a crop field or something. We might accidentally get that into our food supply.
And how could weather maybe help with control for prairie dogs?
Absolutely. So when we're controlling prairie dogs with the toxicants, they tend to be most effective when food is least available, so during the non-growing season. And also, they can be really, really effective when we have a big cold front coming through. We're going to have weather that makes food not available or that makes it to where the prairie dogs want to stay down in the ground and not come out. So if we've got a cold front coming, we know we're going to have snow and maybe an extended period of very frigid temperatures. That's really the best time to treat prairie dog colonies if we're wanting to get the best control possible. If we're only wanting to knock them back, we don't want to kill all of them, but we want to do a pretty good job of knocking them back, then probably any time during that October to March time frame's good.
What if pesticides aren't an option when it comes to prairie dog control?
Sure. So that brings in the concerns about being in a cropland. And I've started getting the calls that I tend to get in the fall about prairie dogs from wheat producers. So we've got prairie dogs that are in rangelands adjacent to wheat fields, and they start encroaching out into those wheat fields because, let's face it, that green growing wheat it's a grass, and it's palatable, it's nutritious, and so those prairie dogs want to eat that. The challenge here is that, like we said, we can't use the toxicant products out in the crop fields. So we have to focus on either trapping, shooting, or fumigants. Trapping prairie dogs is pretty time-consuming, but it can be very effective. I'd be glad to show folks about that if they're interested. We're not talking about recreational shooting here. We're talking about very directed, sort of tactical shooting. And then for the fumigants, the main options are going to be aluminum phosphide, magnesium phosphide, or poisonous gas cartridges. And it's very important that folks remember or know that in Kansas we have what's called a prairie dog control permit. And that permit is required to use fumigants for control of any wildlife in the state of Kansas.
And when it comes to these different control options, if they're needing some help figuring out what to use, can always reach out to you, Drew?
Absolutely. They can reach out to me. They can reach out to their local extension office. And if someone does need to apply for a prairie dog control permit, the local extension office is your first stop there.
Drew, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That was K-State Wildlife Specialist Drew Ricketts. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.